Steven Universe is returning to our screens in the near future with Lars of the Stars, a spin-off that promises new adventures across the galaxy, which will uncover the darkest secrets of the Gem Empire. And while a lot of people are psyched, you have just as many people asking, why Lars? He's always been a divisive character due to his treatment towards Steven and Sadie prior to his rebirth on Homeworld. And even though he's grown as a character, it's valid to be skeptical over the decision to make him the face of a continuation. But the truth is, Lars is the perfect character to take over as the lead protagonist for so many reasons. Not just from a storytelling standpoint, but a meta one as well. I actually think that if you hated Lars because of how he behaved for most of the show, then you're going to get way more out of this spin-off than the people who already love him. So what better way to usher in a new era of Crystal Clear than to unpack why Lars has to replace Steven as the new main character, and what I believe Rebecca Sugar and Ian JQ are going for with this new addition to the Steven Universe franchise. Hit the intro! First off, making Lars the main character gives us a much needed shakeup that fans have been begging for. Freedom from the Steven-only perspective. Throughout all of Steven Universe, we weren't allowed to see anything that the titular character wasn't there for. The only exception being flashbacks, which were still stories and information being relayed to Steven. While this led to instances of very creative storytelling, fans saw this limitation as a hindrance because while Steven was spending 11 minutes on Ronaldo shenanigans, numerous characters had their stories progress off-screen. Stories that seemed way more interesting than the slice-of-life townie adventures, including whatever Lars and the off-colors were getting into. Breaking the Steven perspective finally allows us to explore everything this universe has to offer from a brand new angle. Though I gotta say, I hope we're not locked into a Lars-only perspective. I'd love to see different points of view from all the off-colors and even the antagonist. Go balls to the walls with it. And assuming a lot of familiar faces pop up throughout this series, we'll get to see how they act when Steven isn't around, which is exciting. Let Pearl say f***. Now you may be thinking, we can escape the Steven-only perspective without centering the show around Lars. And while that's true, Lars makes the most sense thematically. As I talked about on Secrets in Steven Universe Volume 2, Lars is effectively an inverse of Rose. Instead of a gem who threw everything away in space to live more like a human being on Earth, he's a human who's leaving his home planet behind to live more like a gem in space. With that in mind, I want to see where his story ends. Since he and Rose ended up in opposite situations, is his rebel phase going to end with him as Homeworld's new leader? Or do the creators have something else in mind? I also imagine Lars will be in a similar spot to where Steven was at the start of the original series. Despite living with his crew for years, he still doesn't know everything about them. Much like how Steven didn't know the lore behind the crystal gems, despite living with them for most of his life. This gives Sugar a chance to incorporate stories that she's been talking about for years, like the tale of Rhodonite, alongside exciting revelations that could span the whole series, like meeting fluorite's various components and the different fusions they could all make up. I saw someone online describe this as a reverse Alexandrite, and that's the perfect way to look at it. Lars also doesn't know everything about gem culture. He knows even less than Steven, allowing us to learn new information alongside him, whether that be the various colonies, single gem versions of Homeworld fusions, or dark secrets like horrifying gem experiments that were kept under wraps. Keep in mind, Steven spent 2 years after Change Your Mind helping dismantle colonies across the galaxy and help Homeworld transition into a democracy. We got a taste of these adventures through the third video game, Unleashed the Light, which is canon. So Steven does now know more about Homeworld than we do, meaning there's very little we can learn alongside him. And if we focus on gems, they have all this info programmed into themselves, so we run into the same problem. Another way Lars will mirror Steven is with his powers. He does have Lion's abilities, but he never used them in the show, at least on screen.
Anything Lion can do, Lars can do.
Has Lars figured that out yet, or is that something he's going to find out?
Well, he will at some point figure that out and use it, and it'll be really funny. But, yeah. Don't worry about it.
I could totally buy that Lars never really used his powers that much when he was trying to get back home, putting him in a position where he needs to get better control over them, just like Steven had to. And I can't wait to see Lars use his powers. Bingo bongo shockwave beams! Screaming so loud he accidentally creates a portal at a moment where his powers would really come in handy. Just imagine how cool it'll be when Lars has a dramatic anime-esque awakening moment where his eyes glow completely white and he locks locks in. I also love that Steven now kind of gets to act like the Goku of the series, showing up to save the day when all hope seems lost. I don't know how many people remember because it's been years, but Steven can literally jump out of Lars's head at any given moment, and he's become so powerful that unless he gets nerfed like with the Rejuvenator, he can immediately get the upper hand in any conflict. From the Steven only perspective, it means there's way less stakes, but with him on the sidelines, it really spices things up. We're going from never being able to escape Steven to probably begging for him to show up before someone gets killed. Keep in mind, shattering can only be reversed if Steven is around to do it, unless he leaves some of his essence with the diamonds like they do for him. But that begs the question, what happens if one or more of the diamonds are taken out of the equation? All of this is to say that there is still a very real sense of danger in this series. Lars is one of the only few characters who could take on a leading role while still having ties to the primary setting of the original show. Beach City and the townies that inhabit it can still appear if and when Lars chooses to visit home, whether that's to see his parents or check on his bakery. And I wouldn't be surprised if Ronaldo forces a space adventure out of him. Lars also brings a new perspective to not just Homeworld, but the diamonds. Steven has a complicated relationship with them because they're family. It's how we ended up in this awkward situation where they adore him and are willing to change for him, while he's adamant on keeping his distance from them while encouraging their growth. Lars just sees the diamonds for who they are, and I expect he'll be way more critical of them and where they ended up compared to Steven, providing some commentary that I'm sure a lot of fans will resonate with. Lars also doesn't strike me as a pacifist, so I'm interested in seeing how he'll handle situations compared to Steven. Lars seems like the kind of guy to instigate an intergalactic shootout for the thrill of it. It'd be refreshing to see a lead character in this world who picks fights instead of advocating against them. We're not even close to being finished, but real quick, I just wanted to say that if you dig the thumbnail art for this video, not only should you give our wonderful artist Janky Bones a follow on social media, but consider supporting us over on patreon.com/roundtablevids. Most of the Patreon money goes into art for the channel, and if you sign up for just $1, you'd help us afford a lot more. I have so many ideas for videos that rely on commissioning a ton of art, so it really would help level up our production. If you can't swing it, no biggie, but if you can, the link will be in the description. Thank you so much. Lars is actually one of Rebecca Sugar's oldest characters, predating Steven Universe itself as Sugar created him and Sadie in our college days. Even his evolution to a pink space pirate was planned from the beginning. Lars is a character Sugar holds a lot of love for, and giving him his own show is not only a full circle moment for her, but Lars himself, and also Lars's voice actor Matthew Moy, as he auditioned for both Lars and Steven. Imagine auditioning for a main character and a side character, only to land the side character, who gets upgraded to the role of main character 12 years later. Crazy. When you look at the bigger picture, Lars's character arc isn't close to complete. The original Steven Universe was just the first chapter in his story. He was an insecure asshat who attempts to look cool and macho constantly blew up in his face. And when he finally had the chance to be a tough guy when Topaz had Sadie captive, he chickened out of even trying to save her. He atoned for his cowardice by protecting the off-colors after discovering his immunity to gem technology, but this one selfless action still cost him his life. At least for a couple of minutes, as Steven's tears resurrected him, but with the catch no one saw coming. While technically still alive with an extremely slow heartbeat, Lars is effectively a magical zombie like Lion, doomed to outlive his loved ones on Earth as he'll never age. Like Steven, he now exists in a spectrum between human and gem.
Their aging process is extremely slowed down, as indicated by the very, very slow heartbeat.
So they will die someday.
Slow. Yeah, they will die, for sure.
They'll live a really, really long time.
Longer than they'll want to.
Yet, we never explore how Lars feels about this drastic change to his life. Despite a handful of appearances as Captain Lars, his development more or less comes to a halt here. We see glimpses of maturity in Future's little graduation, as he's embraced his passion for baking by opening his own shop, and he's at peace with the fact that he and Sadie can't work out romantically. But that's all we really get. This is where Lars of the Stars gets to set itself apart from the rest of Steven Universe, as it'll not only continue to flesh out Lars, but explore his significance amongst amongst gem kind. Lest we forget, he was the first full-fledged human to set foot on Homeworld. He evaded the forces of an elite gem, and his presence in the galaxy is a threat to anyone with ill intentions. Whereas the crystal gems are the defenders of Earth, Lars and the off-colors are sticking up for all the little guys out in space. The logline for the series mentions that Lars is an eternal teenager, and his state as an undead being is baked into the logo, with the O and of being substituted with a skull. Hell, the off-colors insignia is a skull in front of a star. Also, keep in mind, I'm going to refer to Lars as immortal, as to us, he pretty much is. The line's been alive for a few hundred years, so I imagine Lars is at least gonna make it to the 3000s. There's no doubt in my mind that Lars's arc here will center around an existential crisis as he's forced to come to terms with his immortality, but actively tries to avoid thinking about it by using the pirate life as escapism. Which might sound weird, but it was set up back in Season 5 of the OG series. When he's Captain Lars and actively engaged in a dangerous situation, he's extremely courageous, but also a lot more cocky and arguably reckless. This is most evident when he encounters Emerald and commands his crew to drop the Sun Incinerator shields while she attacks, because he had a feeling she'd miss on purpose. Even though it all worked out in his favor, this was still a really risky move, and his way of handling it was messy to say the least, refusing to let the team in on his reasoning for the sake of drama and flair. He knew that if he could pull it off, he'd look cool as hell in front of Steven and Connie, which reminds me of how he desperately wanted to show off in front of the cool kids. Old habits die hard. Lars is still chasing after admiration and projects those desires onto this Captain Harlock cosplay. This isn't Lars Barriga, this is Lars of the Stars, and he's everything that Lars Barriga failed to be. I think that need for validation could be a really interesting character flaw that separates him from Steven while still being relatable and vulnerable to the audience in a way that only a Steven Universe character could be. Trying to be a badass won't always pay off. In fact, I fully expect the inciting incident of this story to involve Lars being full of himself, only to screw up and face major consequences that will not only impact him, but his crew. I also think, while Steven was in a hurry to mature and be taken seriously by the crystal gems, Lars will latch on to his childlike wonder and hide behind his space pirate persona as a means to avoid confronting the future and what the rest of his life is even going to look like. I've seen a few different people suggest that Lars went back into space because he couldn't handle being around his friends and family, as they're all aging before his very eyes while he's stuck in a body of a teenager. He thinks it makes more sense to be around gems as they won't age. They'll always look the same. By being out in space, far away from Beach City and surrounded by gems, he's essentially frozen himself in time. And that can't be healthy. And for the record, Lars is somewhere between 19 and 21 by the time we hit Steven Universe Future, as he at least had to be between 16 and 18 in Season 1 of the original series on account of having a driver's license. Everyone's at least a year older by the end of the original series, and there's a 2-year time skip in between Change Your Mind in the movie. There are also implications that he was held back a year in school, so I would argue that his body is that of an 18-year-old's. I point this out because I believe Lars taking over as a main character is representative of a shift in demographics, as I'd put money on Lars of the Stars being at least TV-14, pushing it out of the realm of kids animation and into adult animation territory, just like Fiona and Cake. Fiona and Cake was the second time a Cartoon Network series was able to free itself from the shackles of kids entertainment, the first being Samurai Jack, and it was a huge success. Plus, this is going to Prime Video, which tends to host adult animation. And I've seen enough full disclosure edits on TikTok to know that the people who were Steven Universe kids are now invincible and Has Been Hotel adults. Steven Universe is actually the perfect show to bridge the gap between these two shows, because Lars's character is built around toxic masculinity, and that's a prominent theme in Invincible, even if a lot of people just focus on the hype moments in Aura. And Has Been Hotel obviously has two major things in common with Steven Universe: gay people and singing. United, these three will make up the Trinity of Prime Video cartoons that'll take over your social media feed every time a season drops. I also think Lars being the main character and being referred to as an eternal teenager relates back to the audience, as if this is a few years after Future, he'd be in his 20s but still look and feel like the person he was at 18. Something that a lot of people go through once they graduate high school or college and enter the adult world. You know, getting your first quote-unquote real job, where you're working alongside other adults who are vastly older than you, and it shows. They're farther along in life as a result. Having a family, a mortgage, and a lot going on in their lives while the only kids you have are pets, you're either still still living at home with your parents or just moved into your first apartment that's barely decorated, and your hobbies still boil down to gaming and watching some guy talk about his cartoon theories on the internet. It just makes sense that this spinoff will be for everyone who grew up with the original show, and thus have the freedom to explore heavier subject matter as a result. In fact, I don't think they can do Lars's existential crisis justice if there were limits to how much they could dig into death and mortality. Nor do I think kids will be able to relate to what I suspect will be a huge part of his journey, which will be reflecting on his mistakes and coming to terms with the fact that he fumbled his one shot at a normal life. Which is why if you hate Lars and think you can't get behind him, then you actually may have more in common with the guy than you think. His flaws and actions will haunt him. He'll still be bombarded with the memories of mistreating Sadie and Steven. A shame that he ever behaved that way, even if these are still two of his closest friends who don't hold any ill will toward him. Even though he's changed and grown as a person, he'll literally always look like the asshole that he was before Homeworld, and he has to learn to not let that define him. We'll also likely dive more into Lars's past, which will give us a better understanding of his poor behavior in the earlier seasons, uncovering the source of his toxic masculinity and his need to be seen as cool. It wouldn't surprise me if he was a lot more like Steven when he was a kid, bubbly, optimistic, and hanging around people older than him, but unlike the cool kids in Steven, the people Lars were around bullied him and really screwed up his confidence, taking digs at his appearance and emasculating him at a young age, which took a toll on his confidence, explaining why he started drifting away from Ronaldo and gradually became the guy we meet at the start of Steven Universe. He seemed to have a good home life, but I feel like something had to have happened in his childhood, and I think revealing that he was rejected by the older kids in his community while Steven was embraced would be a great parallel that puts things into perspective. Now, I cannot stress this enough. These would be explanations, not justifications. I'm not saying some sad flashbacks would handwave his treatment of Steven and Sadie. We're all older now, we understand nuance. Although I do hope the show also examines both sides of Lars and Sadie's relationship a bit, because while Lars was too embarrassed to commit to Sadie and publicly be in a relationship with her, Sadie had some very extreme responses. Lars lies to her to get out of work. She literally sets his mouth on fire. They bond on a remote island, so she decides to hike their ticket home so the good times don't have to stop, which almost got them killed. They were both messy, and I imagine she's gotta pop up eventually, so better late than never to clear the air. But there you have it, folks. All the reasons why Lars will actually make for a perfect main character moving forward. And just because he has a spinoff doesn't mean that Steven won't have any more stories to tell, but that's speculation for another video. For now, I want to know what you guys think. Drop your thoughts in the comments down below. If you enjoy this video, throw it a like. And if you want to stay in the loop of all our theories, be sure to subscribe to the Roundtable notifications on so you never miss an upload. We're just getting started when it comes to Lars of the Stars content. I got a ton of theories I want to share with y'all. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you have an awesome day. Peace!